Hello, everybody. My name is George McLaughlin. I'm here today with my buddy Tim Kessler to talk to you about specialty lab integration, interoperability, best practices. So today, in our small little class, we're going to go through why are we talking about specialty labs, what's the value of integration, and then best practices for you to follow so that you can access and exchange the data you need and deliver your product in an optimized fashion. To get us started, just a little bit of background. My name is George McLaughlin. I'm the Director of Solutions Marketing here at Redox. Redox is a healthcare integration platform and service provider that works with digital health products to help them access and deliver the data they need with all of their customers, whether it's large academic medical centers, small practices, anything in between. And I'm joined by Tim Kessler. Tim, you want to do a little bit of intro of yourself?
Yeah, thanks, George. Hey, everyone. My name's Tim Kessler. I'm a senior solutions architect here at Redox on our strategic partnerships team. Been with Redox now for the last 6 years, and before then used to do implementations back at Epic. So have been working in the EHR and the integration space for quite a while now, and excited to dig in on this with everyone.
Awesome. So why we're doing this type of content is that from our position as an organization that works with many different digital health product companies and the health systems adopting them, we are seeing trends of specific types of data exchange workflows that are becoming more and more in demand. And we believe it's our job to help folks kind of demystify how that workflow is executed in the real world, obviously tied into how Redox solves it, but then also to help clarify, what we can offer our partners, but then in general, just also kind of shine a light on a specific part of digital health so folks who are building solutions kind of understand what they're getting into. So today we want to focus on specialty lab space. So when we talk about specialty labs, from our customer side of things, where we see the most traction is in the increase in genomic testing. There's obviously other categories of testing that can fall into the specialty lab space, but we do want to we're really talking about workflows. If you're an organization that does the actual testing and then delivering those results back to a healthcare organization or a provider at that healthcare organization. We're not talking about, lab integration just generally or broadly, your most standard diagnostic reference labs that are very, those are happening all the time. Most systems already have a pretty straightforward, if you're going to go get your basic blood work done, or if they're going to send you to do, a drug test or whatnot, those are sort of already in place. So we're really talking about in the specialty lab space. Another way to think about that would be like a CLIA certified lab, where they're either doing, specific tests or even lab developed tests at that organization, then resulting back into a healthcare facility. So again, the purpose of this is not to do like a huge market analysis of the space, but I always like to start with why are we talking about this? And I think some of these metrics about the market size and then the growth over time helps ground us. So there's a ton of reports like this out here. This is from a group called Grandview Research, but you can just kind of get a feel for the size of this space and the growth that we are being projected from 2018 through 2028. And you can see why there's increased demand for integration and interoperability in this space. So that's why we're gonna talk a little bit more about this. One area that I would also like to touch on of why we're getting into this is there is just a lot of innovation going on in the specialty lab space. So both on a lab developed test side, I think the best example was COVID. There was just this influx of LDTs to help facilitate that. But then also just in general, there's been a lot of technical advances to just increase the volume of testing, the turnaround time, and then just the quantity of tests available. Additionally, we're seeing this increase in, the trend of consumerism in healthcare. So this is either going to a direct-to-consumer organization to, request testing. So this could be like food sensitivity, at-home genomic panels, et cetera. There's a whole different rabbit hole about the clinical efficacy of that stuff, but there is increased demand for lab testing, and that data may work itself into other settings. So having it be able to be exchanged is increasingly important. And then there's also just the influx of the ability to go to retail centers, a CVS, a Walgreens or whatnot, and increase testing there as well. So a specific area for us, for our customer base where this is most prevalent and where we've developed these kind of tried and true workflows that we're going to share with you is really in the genetic testing space. So we have a number of customers that are supporting efforts here. So some of the most common examples are carrier screenings, pre-transplant screenings, and then genomic panels that are used specifically to for matching with therapies in cancer treatments are just some examples. I want to call out here, there's this really good report from HHS that is available. I've linked it here and we'll link it kind of in the recording notes, but it goes through just the explosion of genetic testing over. So the report is from 2016 to 2019. Obviously, we're in 2022, but that is the most recent HHS funded and published report on this. But you can just see just this jump in that period. So there's a bunch of data in there, but if you look at the payments for genetic tests and the number of laboratories that have gone over $1 million per year of genetic tests, you can see that just like huge influx from 2016 to 2019. We've only seen that trend continue into 2022. So this is an area where this specialty labs is hugely like a much more important area where this information needs to go to a third party for the testing and resulting, and then to flow back in and then be associated with the patient's chart to follow them moving forward. So this is just a workflow we're seeing more and more, and that's why we want to talk a little bit more about it. All right. So Tim, is there anything you want to call out just about kind of the space in general that I didn't cover?
No, I think you hit on some of the key points. And especially when you start looking at some of that genomic testing data, there's quite a few public companies that, as part of their quarterly filings, release quite a bit of data around the volume of testing growth. So if you're curious on how those numbers from 2019 on have continued to expand, there's certainly some public data that's worth taking a look at. Companies like Invitae release a lot of this content regularly. So certainly an area where we've seen a massive explosion of growth, and not really an area that I expect to see slow down.
Thank you so much. So now we're just going to go into, so what's the value of integration here? You know, why should you invest in making sure that the ordering and resulting is done in an integrated fashion instead of, you know, faxing or whatnot? So first and foremost, optimizing the ordering process. So as I talked about, if you look at that HHS data of just the increase in volume of tests and labs providing these tests, the just quantity and complexity is increasing. So any aspect that you can do to help the ordering provider understand what they should be ordering, and then also to accelerate that process so there's not a bunch of just double documentation, is critically important for your solution being used, obviously, and then also just for, you know, the benefit of the providers, the caregivers who are constantly being tasked to know more, be aware of more. So integration allows you to optimize that process so that you're going to get maximum utilization and value out of it. The second thing is accelerating the testing and delivery. You can just, this is kind of obvious, but if you're able to, you know, get the request for a test, get the information that you need, get the sample, etc., the faster you can do that, the faster you can do the resulting, and the faster you can deliver it back. And then that can have a meaningful impact on outcomes by, you know, having an influence on what care decision is happening next. Integration also supports result interpretation. So genetics is kind of the best example of this, where it's not just like a one number discrete reading and it's either high or low, right? Like there is a lot of additional context that is added. I know we have some partners where a classic resulting test is really like a 3 to 4 page document, which has the results, and then it has kind of the analysis of the results to support that interpretation. So integration allows you to either file that additional information with the result, or even, you know, allow a provider to then launch into a separate application or product to learn more. Just a lot of ways to support that type of the communication of, okay, what does this mean? What intended action should be taken next? And then finally, supporting the claims process. So if you don't have your ordering and resulting and everything in an integrated fashion, the path to getting it, you know, posted as a claim or in your revenue cycle management process, or even matching to the right billing codes over time, making sure this test is always logged this way, you really don't have a path to improve that and accelerate that. So integration allows that to be true. Tim, is there anything else here that you wanted to touch on the value of actually pursuing, you know, sophisticated integration if you are a specialty lab doing this type of testing and resulting? You're on mute, just really quick.
I think these 4 items hit on all the key points when it comes to integrating a specialty lab integration. Ultimately, though, you're going to want to limit the amount of steps a provider needs to take to order your lab for a specific patient. And if you can build out the integration through Redox directly into that provider's workflow, reduce the amount of clicks, remove the need for them to jump to any separate windows or submit these requests, and then ensure that these results are filing back in, sitting neatly within everything else within that patient's chart, and allowing for the billing process to occur seamlessly associated with those core details from that encounter. That's just going to make everybody's job in the entirety of this process significantly easier, which is going to, of course, increase adoption as your product becomes easier and easier to use and functions just like any other order would within an EHR ecosystem.
People want an integrated offering, folks. I think you all understand that. But in case you don't, it really is sort of table stakes at this point. All right, so now we're going to go through integration best practices. So this is, again, from our position, Redox is connected to over 2,500 health systems. We work with over 350 digital health product companies. We have these concurrent integrations passing, millions of messages live at all times. So in our experience working with all these different product teams and working with the health systems themselves, we've stood up a bunch of integrations and figure out workflows that accomplish what is required for a product to deliver its value. So we're going to go through 3 examples. So one is kind of your essential. How are you going to, be a specialty lab that accepts orders and delivers results in an integrated fashion? And then we're going to go to a advanced workflow, and then what we would describe from our experience as a market leading workflow of additional integration functionality that you can offer and that we have delivered with our partners. So to start, we have what we call our essential integration. So at the start of all of these workflows for specialty labs is you need to receive a testing request, right? This is pretty straightforward, but you obviously want to do this in an efficient way. So this is going to be ordered directly from the primary EHR system. And then in Redox's world, so Redox works with product teams to basically allow them to receive this type of request just at an endpoint of their designation, which will have all the information that they need. So this is the simplest. This is how it gets started. Tim, I wanted you to kind of tap into. So on our side, you have a HTTPS endpoint where when you have an integration powered by Redox, you're going to receive basically an order, which will be what is the test being requested, patient's demographic information, et cetera, that you need to then take the next step. Can you talk about like what we do on the back end to make that possible in traditional healthcare settings?
Yeah, absolutely. So in most scenarios that we see live lab integrations today, healthcare organizations and their EHR partners are using an HL7 based orders and results feed. So that's an HL7 ORM message that triggers outbound from the EHR once that lab order is signed. And then that's an inbound HL7 ORU message, which is what is used to communicate the results from that order back into the EHR. Now, we are seeing some organizations that either use proprietary EHR-specific APIs, which Redox can certainly connect to, as well as organizations that are on the forefront of FHIR adoption and are looking to leverage FHIR as opposed to HL7. I would say even organizations that are on the forefront of FHIR, given the volume of existing lab integrations that take place today, we still see the majority of lab integrations leverage an event-based HL7, ORM, and ORU interface. But if you have organizations or partners that prefer an API-based connection or a FHIR-based connection, Redox can certainly support connecting into those interface standards and normalizing those to your preferred method of consumption from a Redox perspective. Now, George mentioned that in most scenarios, you would set up an HTTPS endpoint and consume that via Redox, likely in our JSON-based data models. So when that order is signed in the EHR, it would trigger an outbound HL7 ORM message. That's going to hit Redox. We're going to process that and translate that into either our JSON-based orders data model, or we could convert that into a FHIR format to post to your endpoint. So Redox is certainly looking to promote and expand the adoption of FHIR in this ecosystem. So if you prefer to consume from Redox via FHIR as opposed to our JSON, that's certainly no problem at all. And on that note, we could expose the capabilities for you guys to either consume that as an event-driven FHIR payload, or if you prefer to initiate a query against our API, we could certainly persist this data and make it available in the more on-demand format. ultimately, our perspective here is we want to make this integration as easy as possible for all of our partners. So if there's a preference on your end and a preference on the healthcare organization end, we don't think those necessarily need to align. Redox is here to sit in the middle and normalize those so that you can connect to Redox in your preferred integration method, while we can connect to that healthcare organization, leverage their preferred integration method. Now, for the context of this, I'll speak from the HL7 perspective because that's the most common use case we still see for orders and lab integrations, particularly in the specialty lab space. So providers running through that encounter with that patient, they place an order for your specific specialty lab test. That's going to trigger an outbound HL7 message to Redox, likely over a VPN that Redox will consume, translate into our JSON-based data model, and post your endpoint. This is going to have all the necessary information you need, such as patient name, details associated with that specific lab. As part of the implementation, if you have additional kind of order specific questions that you want that provider to collect from the patient during the order entry flow, we can certainly work with both you and the healthcare organization and their EHR to build out those specific questions. We call them ask at order entry questions to ensure that that provider is entering all the necessary information for you to act on that order. So if you have additional ask at order entry questions that tailor specifically to this lab, we can have those built into the order that's placed from the EHR so that when those flow through and hit your endpoint, you have all the content necessary for you to act on that order. Now, once you've actually acted on that order, completed anything necessary, generated the necessary result documentation that you want to push back into the EHR, all you'll have to do is post to the Redox API, specifically our results endpoint, where Redox will pick that up, translate that either into an HL7 ORU message, or post to the appropriate FHIR resource per that healthcare organization's desired communicate or content format. Additionally, I'd call out here if you're doing genetic testing or genomic testing, these, like George mentioned, are much more complex results. We do support the ability to relay discrete genomic detail back inbound to the EHR in really that kind of multi-tiered format where you'll likely have many results from that specific test that you want to communicate back into the EHR. We do have a genomics white paper that we can share on how exactly we do this. The key thing I'd want to call out is really we use a heavy leverage of the related group ID within that result message to really tier those results associated with that specific genomic reading. So rather than just having that single result, you can have many components of that result that tie back to the initial test, allowing us to file that information discreetly back into the EHR for EHRs that support that.
Fantastic. So yeah, I think the main takeaways to have here is, this is the essential data exchange workflow that you need to be able to accomplish, which is receiving this request with all the information you need to then actually take the next step, and then for it to be delivered directly back into that EHR for reference and association with the patient's chart. On the Redox side, we simplify that to pretty straightforward API calls and standardized workflow. And then on the back end, a Redox implementation, as Tim outlined, there's various mechanisms that we leverage and then abstract away from to provide that consistent experience to our partner. One just quick question, Tim, just to clarify, is that, again, in the spirit of the value of the integrated offering, can you share how that result basically just kind of stays with the patient, or it continues to be associated, or becomes a piece of that medical record moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're posting that ORU message back inbound or when we're sending that ORU message back inbound to the EHR, we're going to have some required data points that we look for you to post to our results endpoint when sending that content to us. Specifically, when that order is initially placed, in that payload, that orders payload that we're going to post to your endpoint, there's going to be a specific medical record number for the patient. There could even be encounter identifiers associated with that. If you can return this information back when posting the results, so including the patient's medical record number, as well as a specific encounter ID, that's going to allow us to tie this information back to that specific patient record in that specific encounter. Now, this is really important when you look at a lot of the downstream scenarios that occur during these encounters. So once this encounter actually takes place, there will be a whole revenue cycle process to actually drop charges, generate and generate the claims associated with this specific encounter. And having the order and these results associated with that specific encounter is going to allow for a much cleaner process through that revenue cycle review. It's going to require less intervention from end users at the healthcare organization, so that hopefully they can get those claims out the door much sooner than if there's additional follow-up needed to figure out what was done during that encounter. Now that encounter is going to be tagged to that patient chart indefinitely, and those results are going to be tagged as part of that encounter to that patient's chart indefinitely. So if you think about a patient chart within an EHR like Epic, where you have a chart review window and can navigate to results, these are things that can be trended over time in a specific patient's medical record. They're also things that could be exposed to the patient directly via their patient portal. So having this information exist, not just in a structured PDF format or a scanned fax in the patient's chart, but having this information discreetly documented in that patient's chart by filing in these results details through a Redox integration is going to allow a provider to trend these values and track that patient's progress over time in a discrete format, rather than just with uploaded scanned faxes. So that's our goal here, to make this information as usable and functional to the provider and the patient as possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that additional clarity. I think it's just really important to call out how, again, one of the values of doing this the right way, is ensuring that that patient record is as complete and comprehensive and accurate, either for that facility or other future use cases. All right, so the second workflow, so that's an essential integration that Redox can support for you and help you deliver that in an optimized way for your partners, so that your product can have the most utilization and then the intended outcomes. So the next kind of an advanced level of this integration is actually adding one more step. So there are certain situations where, in addition to delivering the results to the ordering healthcare organization, there's certain specialty tests that could benefit from also delivering those results to a reporting agency, a public health department, or what have you. Best example of this currently has been COVID testing, right? If you stood up an integrated offering, obviously you want the results to go to wherever that patient had a test, so they can follow up with them and say positive, negative, what have you. But then also from a public health status, it was just getting as many of those results into a centralized location as possible to track trends and have an impact on a population health level. So we've done a lot of this, of helping folks send results to reporting agencies and public health departments. Tim, do you want to kind of just clarify like what would be, so from a product team standpoint, in addition to the result to the health system, what they would have to do, and then also kind of what we do to help that final delivery to these systems, which kind of vary in what they're capable of, or their design and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. So Redox makes this about as simple as it could possibly be. Same workflow as before. You're receiving that order generated from the EHR, you're acting on that order, you're generating those results, and you want to post them back into the EHR. Now, Redox has quite powerful functionality on this point, in that when you're looking to send a message back inbound to an EHR, we actually support the ability for you to send that payload to multiple destinations. Now, in most scenarios, there aren't too many use cases for this. You're probably not going to want to write a patient's results back to a single or to multiple EHR ecosystems at different healthcare organizations. Everything ultimately needs to tie back to that patient's medical record number, which is going to be unique to that specific healthcare organization. But because we support the ability to post to multiple destinations, you could write that back to the EHR, include an additional destination, such as a public health department or a state health department, and have that message route not just to the healthcare organization, but also to that public health department. Now, from a Redox perspective, you won't, or from your integration perspective, you won't have to worry about different communication methods between that EHR ecosystem or that public health department. Redox is going to normalize all that. We handle and maintain the connectivity between both the EHR and the public health departments. So regardless of whether or not the format is different, you would still post to Redox in that result JSON-based data model or in that FHIR payload, and we would normalize that to the desired communication method and content format of the specific healthcare organization and that public health department. So ultimately, you'd be able to route a single payload to Redox and have that go to both the EHR as well as the public health department. And we could do this with however many public health agencies were interested in consuming that data. Additionally, I think we're live now at over 60 public health departments. So quite a few states have multiple of these. Some split it up for more core lab content as well as kind of vaccine reporting information. So there's quite a few agencies that we have existing integrations with and can get data flowing to these organizations in a very short turnaround as a result of this existing infrastructure.
Fantastic. I think that is a good thing to call out. This isn't a hardcore Redox sales pitch. We're just trying to explain what workflows we see are in high demand and help you understand how we solve them and what is required just in general. But that's a good thing to call out that, again, if you partner with Redox, you're working with an organization that all we do is integration, and we're able to share our best practices and knowledge that we've learned like on the front lines of actually doing this, and then extend that to our partners. So, right, we learned a lot connecting to 60 public health departments across all 50 states. And then that makes it even easier for the next folks that need that as part of their workflow and for us to optimize that for you. All right. So then the last, interoperability, kind of consideration or like an integration workflow best practice that we have executed with partners and we see as a market leading integration scope is adding a couple more aspects to it. So again, similar workflow of receiving that testing request. We've been through that. The next thing is adding a step to retrieve the patient's kind of family medical history. So right, this goes into a lot of organizations. If you're trying to do like therapy matching for a cancer treatment or whatnot, it's one thing to do the panel and to do the testing, but then there's also other data points you want to factor in to your consideration. So Tim, can you talk a little bit about if you add retrieving a patient's family history, how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So step 1 and 2, exact same integration. You're going to consume that order from the EHR. That's really going to set off the entire process. So think of that really as the initiating event or the enrolling event. Still going to collect that sample for ultimately for testing. But then step 3 is where we look to actually gather additional information. And this is where we can initiate what we'd refer to as a clinical summary query via Redox. This could be a CCD request to a specific healthcare organization's EHR. It could be a clinical summary query against enterprise interop networks like Care Quality or Commonwealth. Through Redox, you'd be able to initiate a CCD query directly against the healthcare organization's EHR, as well as to Care Quality or Commonwealth. So ultimately, if you're looking for data about this patient's clinical history and their family history beyond just what that healthcare organization has captured on that patient, we can certainly support initiating queries to those broader networks to pull as much information back on this patient as possible. Once you've had this information, once you've pulled this information, you can use this to enhance the results that you're ultimately going to write back to ensure that really all the learnings that you've pulled regarding this patient, their history, and how best to continue treating them moving forward, you could put back into the EHR via that result payload that we're writing back inbound, and have that appear directly at the provider's fingertips. Now, some of this information that you might want to include may not fit incredibly nicely in discrete fields for that specific lab result. The plus side is you could certainly push more structured content into the EHR as well. So you could have all the discrete readings associated with your lab result, as well as more structured or formatted content, potentially in the form of a PDF or some other content delivery method, back inbound to the patient's chart, saddled alongside that result record, in case you want to structure that a bit more tailored to how you're looking for the provider to consume that, and not necessarily along the lines on how the EHR would display that content. And lastly, just like we mentioned before, you would still be able to trigger these same results out to the state or the public health departments via that same integration. We could certainly adjust the payload or add a filter to that if there's a component of that that you want flowing back into the EHR, but don't want flowing to the public health department. So making this as simple as possible for you. So it's still that single connection, but ensuring that the EHR is only receiving the content they're interested in, and the public health agency is only receiving the content that they're in. Now, I do want to call out one other component that you could use to enhance this even a bit further. I've seen quite a few use cases for this in scenarios where, maybe ask at order entry questions during the order placement process in the EHR aren't enough to collect the discrete data or the data that you're looking for in that specific patient. Or maybe you want to enable a provider to have a much greater selection window when they're going through and placing that order. Maybe there's variables that you want to include on that. Or maybe it's a situation where you're looking to have that provider order something specific for a patient, and that list of available orderables changes so frequently that you don't want to have to continually re-update the order in the EHR. In scenarios where this is occurring, it might make the most sense to actually launch a third-party application from directly within the EHR. Now, there are really two ways that Redox supports doing this, and more so the broader industry from an EHR perspective. This could either be a SAML-based SSO integration or a Smart on Fire-based application launch. In both these scenarios, you leverage Redox's SSO data model, and we could exchange the context associated with when that application is being launched from generally by the provider from within the encounter flow in the EHR. This could open a window that displays a third-party UI. So you'd be responsible for generating basically a web application that could be launched from directly within this SSO window. There's going to be quite a bit of context that we can share at this point. So when this window launches, Redox will be passing data through this SSO handshake or Smart on Fire handshake to ensure that you have details about the provider who's taking this action, the patient who they're taking this action on, and then encounter specific details as well, so that you can ensure that the window that opens up to that provider is tailored specifically to the context that provider is acting in. This could allow you to enter in quite a bit more details directly in the EHR, could allow you to really customize the order flow and details that you're collecting as part of that order entry process, as well as adjust the offering based on information you already have about that patient or details around that provider's specific preference if you do customization per provider. So that's certainly kind of the above and beyond use case. It does require a bit more work effort from an implementation perspective, but certainly something we've done on many number of occasions in order to really tailor that in EHR experience to get a lot of value from a provider's perspective.
Fantastic. So yeah, as you know, we call it market leading for a reason. So to Tim's point, to execute this level of integration, you obviously will need a partner at the health system that also wants this desired workflow and has some IT capabilities to work with us and your team to make it happen. But if that motivation is there, it is certainly possible. And I think that this is a level of integration that provides the most value possible, right? You're not just doing the testing, you're also getting additional information that can help you when you are resulting, what insights you're delivering can be more actionable or more nuanced or more customized with that additional information. And then additionally, you're optimizing the end user experience, either at order, at review, or both, to be frank. So I think that this is a cool example of what's possible. And, the reason why we took the time today to explain what is possible is to help folks that are either, looking to optimize their existing integrations or looking to understand what's possible. And I think that these three scopes give you a good overview of what is required, what is added functionality, and then what is sort of the Rolls Royce of integrations, if you will, that can be executed and provide the most value. So that's all we have for today. These are just supposed to be, pretty short, deep dives into specific areas where we are seeing increased demand for specific types of integration. Obviously, what we offer with Redox is going to be a standardized experience for you to execute these data exchange workflows with all of your partners. We on the back end are using our proprietary platform and our team of integration experts to help execute this for you. And you get to use Redox as an extension of your team, building on our years and thousands of live integration experience to make sure that this is able to be executed across your entire customer base. I think personally, we find this space, a very interesting one. Testing, it's kind of interesting. There's if you look at some of the research, there's an argument that we both underutilize and overutilize testing in healthcare in the United States. So we're still working to find that sweet spot. It's our personal opinion that when you have the right partners with the right healthcare organizations and good integration, we can actually have that path to making sure that the right tests are being ordered and not missed. And then also you're not just like overutilizing tests that aren't providing any value, and then making sure that the value is delivered in a way that is actually actionable instead of just more noise in a space that is already, increasingly complicated and busy for everyone involved. So I really want to thank Tim for taking the time to share his expertise in doing these live integrations and just kind of helping pull the curtain back of, right, on our side, pretty straightforward API calls that you're going to be making. On the back end, there's all these different mechanisms that we're leveraging to make it possible. As far as next steps, the best thing to do is just reach out to us at redoxengine.com. You can always set up a meeting with anyone on our team for like a one-on-one consultation to learn more about your product, what you're trying to accomplish, and how Redox can help. Tim is on Twitter at TCAS11. If you want to get in the health tech conversation. I'm not very active, so there's no point in me sharing anything. But yeah, Tim, is there anything you wanted to leave folks with in the realm of specialty lab integrations, just interoperability thoughts or integration best practices?
I think when it comes to specialty lab integrations, that basic integration is going to be table stakes. It's not really going to be a differentiator. It's going to be an expectation, and it's really going to make the provider and the revenue cycle and just the clinical team's operations significantly easier. But if you're looking to go above and beyond, there's a ton to do here and a ton that can really add quite a bit of power to what you're looking to drive here. It's a fun space. It's growing a lot, and curious to see what folks integrate here.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, obviously we're available to answer them. It is always our goal to help demystify, what is possible when it comes to healthcare data exchange and support the, current and next generation of builders that are building solutions to improve the lives of patients everywhere. So looking forward to hearing from you all and hoping to support you in your integrations in the future. You have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.